friends, and welcome to Haa To Go. Today we're going to be making some pumpkin lanterns using sculpture wire, tissue paper, and some glue. The bonus part of it, and you'll notice in your kit, is that we also are going to incorporate LED lights so that we can make our pumpkin lanterns glow. Let's get started. To make our pumpkin lanterns, we're going to need a few things, which are all included in your kit. We will need some sculpture wire, a glue stick, some tissue paper. We're going to use orange and green for our pumpkin, and an LED light. Now, one thing I want to point out about our LED lights, one, make sure you have a parent around. Never put any of this stuff in your mouth. And another good tip, you have to pull this tab out before your lights will turn on. There we go. Let's get started. The first thing we're gonna do is take our sculpture wire and create a pumpkin form. Now you can see that it already has a bit of what we call a memory to it. And that just means that the wire has been stored in this coil. So no matter what, my shape is always, or my wire is always gonna remember that it was stored like that for a while. So we can either fight it or we can use that to our advantage. Since we're creating a pumpkin shape, which is round, I say we use it to our advantage. So I'm gonna find one end of my sculpture wire. Let's see here, there we go. And I'm gonna start first by just closing that sculpture loop, okay? So I'm gonna find where the end of my wire goes, and I'm gonna wrap the end. You can use your fingers for this. You may need an adult or older sibling to help you out. But if you keep working with it, I think you could do this on your own as well. It's nice and soft. Once I've created an attachment point, I'm just gonna rotate my sculpture wire a little bit to the side. I'm going for kind of 6 sides or 6 ribs for my pumpkin. Okay, now here's where it gets a little tricky. So I've gotten my second attachment point here. What I want to do is work the wire through there and go forward, okay? So now that I've got one loop, I've created half of the other, I've secured a spot on the top and now on the bottom, and I'm going to continue this circle onto the other side of my pumpkin. If you want your pumpkin to be taller, go for it. If you want it to be a little shorter and squishy, that works too. And there's no right or wrong way. So I'm back up to another attachment point. I'm gonna take the rest of my sculpture wire through that hoop. And now you can see I've created 4 ribs or 4 sides to this pumpkin. So I need to create a half circle here and here to complete my form. Okay. And don't worry about if your lines start getting a little crooked. The cool part about sculpture wire is it has a lot of wiggle room. And what that means is if I accidentally bend something in a direction I don't want, I can very easily bend it back. So it might seem like it's difficult or it gets a little frustrating. Hang in there, keep working with it. It gets easier each time you work with it. Okay, so I've gotten my half circle on this side, and now what I'm gonna do is create the final half circle for my pumpkin. And don't worry about if some of your sides are bigger than the other. Remember, we're creating something that's natural. Finding things in nature that have the exact same side or look perfect or look completely symmetrical is not as common as you might think. Sometimes having some variation in there is the thing that makes it look natural. Okay, so now I've created the final half circle for my pumpkin. And what I want to think about here for my last attachment point as I wrap it around is I need to create a little stem for my pumpkin. And you can do this one of 2 ways. What I'm going to do is take the end of my wire and kind of tuck it in some of these other folds that I've made. And this will do 2 things for me. One, it's gonna hide that sharper edge and prevent any accidents from happening and just keep it out of way from where people would touch. But by folding it back onto itself like this, I can now create a little loop where I could hang my pumpkin from too. Pretty cool. Now if I wanted to twist this once or twice to make it look more vine-like, I could do that. If I want it to have a little bit of a curve at the top, that works too. There are no rules. And keep in mind, I'm gonna wrap this with tissue paper. That's what our green paper's for at the end too. So I don't have to be too delicate or too intentional with that shape. I'll have some time to rework that if I want. And what I'm gonna do, because I would like to have my pumpkin sitting on a surface, is make sure before I put anything else or go on to the next step that it can stand up. And look at that. All right, so our next step is going to be wrapping our LED wire around all of these wire stems of the pumpkin so that when I turn it on and off, the entire pumpkin will be illuminated. So the first step is just unravel your LED lights. And what I like to do is start with the end that has my switch. And the reason I'm gonna do that is I wanna make sure that wherever the end point for my pumpkin is, or wherever that opening for my pumpkin is, I make sure that I have this light switch available so that I can turn it on and off when I want to. So I'm gonna put it right near the stem, and when I go to add my tissue paper in the next step, I'm gonna make sure I don't cover up that switch. That is really important. Now there's a little bit of wire before you get to your LED lights. So what I like to do is take my LED lights and wrap that top wire really tight next to my pumpkin. Uh-oh. And if you're starting to get a little tangled like me, I'll show you a technique or a tip for preventing that from happening. Okay, so I've got my wire on the top. I'm gonna wrap this really tightly along here just to kind of hide that. I might go over on some of the other spines just to help this light be nice and secure there. But until I'm ready to start working with this wire portion or the LED portion, I'm just gonna try to very gently ball it up in the palm of my hand. And what that'll do is instead of me fighting all these wires going around each other, I can just pass this bundle from hand to hand, and now all of a sudden it's a lot easier for me to prevent tangles from happening. Okay, so again, I'm taking that part that doesn't have any light on it, and that is the non-coppery part. I'm wrapping it at the top. Once I see that I've gotten to my wire where there are LED lights, that's where I'm gonna start trying to be a little bit more intentional about where I'm placing them. So I'm just going to very gently, this doesn't have to be a real secure attachment because we're just going along these lines, and this is gonna act as our light. I'm gonna gently wrap it across. I like to go opposite side. So if I start with one spine, I'm gonna work my way to the opposite spine. And then that way if I run out of LED lights or run out of wire, it at least looks a little bit more even with where that light is being, or where it's coming from, where it's being distributed from. Okay. Again, trying to prevent my bundle of wires from becoming a big mess, so keeping it in my hand. If you see that you're starting to get tangles, it's a good idea just to take that extra second, untangle your wire before it gets worse. Okay, so I've worked my way up the opposite spine. Got a little tangle, so I'm gonna untangle that, put it in my hand before I move on. And now I'm gonna go to another wire. And the goal is to wrap your wire around in a way that the LED lights are evenly distributed onto the sculpture wire. Now, if you wrap it really, really tight, you're gonna run out of wire before you cover all of your spines. And if you do that, that's okay. You could always go back, unwrap, and try to space it out a little bit evenly or more even. So you would wrap it a little bit looser before you go on to that next spine. Or you could decide, you know what, I don't mind if it's only on 4 of the spines. That works too. Okay, so now I've gotten to the top of my pumpkin. I'm about out of lights, or out of sculpture wire to wrap lights around. So I can do one of two things. I can either take all this extra and go back into some of the spines if I want them to really stand out. And if I had more, I might do a full second pass on every wire. But what I'm gonna do is just kind of take it almost like I would if I was weaving a basket. And I'm gonna go under one spine and then over the next. And what I'm gonna do is just wrap this and try to space it out evenly enough. And you know, it's a good idea to actually go over and make a little mini attachment point as you're going over ribs. As I do this, I'm trying to space it out so that I can get all the way around my pumpkin and down. I think the best lanterns turn out, or are usually ones that have these lights spaced out nice and evenly. Helps the whole thing glow at the end. And hopefully at the end you'll see what I'm talking about. You can kind of think of this like wrapping lights around a tree around the holidays. You don't want all of your lights to be stuck at one point. You want to try to create a line that your eye can follow all the way around this form. And I can see that I'm starting to get less and less of this LED light available. So I want to make sure I'm making my way down to the bottom so that I end at a good spot for me to wrap my wire around. Like so. Okay, let's test it out. See how our form went. There it is. Oh, that'll look so good with our tissue paper on it. If you see any little spots that look like a light should be spread out onto it, now is the time to do that. After we put our tissue paper on, you're not going to be able to mess with the structure of your pumpkin without hurting the tissue. So take a second, look at your shape. Are there areas that you want to be more rounded? Do you want it to be taller? Do the lights need to be spread out a little bit more? All those decisions should be made at this point. I like the way my pumpkin looks, and just to make sure I'm not wasting my battery, I'm gonna turn that off and set this aside. Now what we're gonna do is use our tissue paper to wrap this piece, and I'm gonna show you a good technique for that. If I were to just kind of treat it like a present and wrap it all the way to the top, you could do that, but what happens is you get all these folds of the tissue paper, and when you turn your light on, it doesn't shine through those spots as evenly. So what I'm gonna do is take a look about how big are each of these sections that I need to cover. It looks like it's about half of one of these sheets. So I'm gonna take my sheets with some scissors. You could also rip this if you don't have any scissors at home, and cut these in half. Now that I've got these spaces, I want to see how wide each one of these little areas are. So I've created a section of each pumpkin. I've got 6 even pieces, or even-ish, that I need to cover. Okay, and because I only have 4 of these little sheets, I'm probably gonna have to cut it again. And when I look at how wide these pieces are, that makes a lot of sense to me. So I'm gonna take my wire or my tissue paper and cut it again. And now what we're gonna do is carefully wrap the tissue paper onto itself. I'll see if you can see that on the camera. I wanna make sure I'm wrapping it in a way that I can attach the tissue paper back to itself. And again, remember to leave a spot open for your on and off switch. okay? So in order to attach it, what I'm gonna do is take my glue stick, and it's a good idea to have a piece of paper down just in case you get any glue on your surface. It's not gonna get on your table. Your parents will be very happy about that. Okay, so I'm taking this glue stick, I'm putting glue all down one side or one edge, and I'm gonna work with this glue side starting at the top, and I'm gonna fold it behind the wire and onto itself. See that? And I'm gonna work all the way down. You're gonna have some area where the wire is preventing you from being able to wrap the tissue paper around. That's okay. Just do the best that you can. And everywhere else where it's not being blocked by the wire will be strong enough to keep the tissue paper where it needs to be. Okay, so I've wrapped it onto itself. And now what I'm gonna do is fold this over slightly. And I'm not gonna deal with this edge just yet. I'm gonna do that at the final step. And the reason why is we're gonna use glue on this next piece to attach on top of it, just to kind of hide that seam that we've made now. So this time what I need to think about is having glue on both edges. Because on one edge I'm gonna wrap it around, and on the other edge I'm gonna place it next to the panel. Or place it on that panel next to the one you're working on. And here, I'll show you what I mean by that. So this time I'm putting glue on both edges, okay? And just like I did last time, I'm gonna start at the top, I'm gonna fold the tissue paper onto itself. I'm gonna avoid any overlapping areas or any areas where the wire is preventing me from doing that. Okay, and now what I'm gonna do with this glued edge is place it right on top of that tissue paper from the previous panel. Now if I wanted to, if I was really worried about the overlapping seams, I could use my scissors and trim it up so it's a really small seam that you're seeing. But I'm not too worried about it. Again, I think any kind of variation helps things look more natural. Ah, looks so good. Okay. So getting to our next panel, again, we're gonna cut this in half. Put glue on both sides and do the same thing. And I'm just gonna repeat that for every panel. Okay, so I've wrapped my pumpkin, and now what I'm gonna do is take a look. Do I have any holes that I wanna fill? So this bottom spot is big enough that I'm just gonna take a little piece of my leftover tissue paper and cut a roundish shape for the bottom. And what I'll do is just place glue all along the edge here and very gently press it into place. Like so. And if you had any areas where, let's say maybe you mistakenly cut one of your panels too small, instead of starting over, just cover it like you normally would and then use one of these little patches to fill in the gap. Okay, and let's see, I could either choose to leave the top like it is. If I have any spots that are pulling up, I'm just gonna take my glue stick and help secure it. Okay, don't forget to leave the switch exposed so that you can turn your pumpkin on and off. I actually like the way that this looks at the top, so it wouldn't bother me, but if you want to have more coverage on the top, what you can do is cut another little circle and without needing to glue this in place, I can just poke it through the wire and just sit on top, okay? Now I could either glue this down. I probably will because I actually think it looks pretty unnatural to have it laying on top, but I would just leave that one spot where my switch is open so that it kind of acts like a little secret flap to hide that if you don't like the look of it. Again, doesn't bother me, but I wanted to show you guys this option. I'm just taking a little bit of glue from my glue stick and putting all this extra tissue paper, giving it a home, putting it in place. And it's really easy to lose track of where that switch is, so I know I keep saying it, but make sure you don't cover that light switch. Okay, you don't have to glue that spot. There's just a little flap for me to access that. Okay, so let's see how it looks. Woohoo! Oh, I love it. Okay, so the final step for my pumpkin lantern is gonna be wrapping the stem however I'd like. And again, you could choose just to keep it exposed if you wanted. I could just kind of do like I did with the pumpkin form and cut a strip. But because this is something that's a little bit thicker, I wanted to show you a different technique for the tissue paper. So the first thing I'm gonna do is crumble it up just to give it some more texture. I'm gonna wrap it in half, or sorry, fold it in half, and then I'm gonna fold it again. And now I'm gonna wrap this around the top. I think it creates a nice little variation from how thin your tissue paper is on the rest of your form. So to get this to stick to itself, we just need a little bit of glue. And just like we did with the orange, I'm gonna wrap it onto itself. See that? And now I'm gonna treat it just like I would if I was wrapping any old thing, okay? And you can either glue it back onto itself. I'm gonna run it through the loop that I'm using to hang so that I still have a little hole exposed, but you can't see the wire. And if you want to be able to see the wire, that's cool. You're more than welcome to do that. But I think it'll look better if I keep that wire wrapped so that you can't see it. And there you have it. Let's go ahead and turn it on for the final effect. There's your pumpkin lantern. So now that you have your lantern, find a good spot for it. It's also a good idea just to head into a dark room to see how cool it really lights up your space. One last variation that you could do, I kind of love the pumpkin the way it is, but if I wanted to turn this into a jack-o'-lantern, I could take a Sharpie and carefully mark out some eyes, a jagged tooth smile, whatever I want. Another option would be cutting out black paper or black tissue paper to use in its place. And there you go. I hope you all had as much fun making your pumpkin lanterns as I did. Thank you so much for supporting the AHA School. We really appreciate it. Keep in mind, if you had trouble working with the sculpture wire, you could make your pumpkin lantern flat as well. So that's one tip if you find the other project a little too frustrating. Thank you again for supporting us. We'll see you next time.